to those listening on the Big Weekend podcast. A lot of news going on around the world, an extraordinary amount of news going around the world. But the one bit that I got from news items that you may not know is that it is believed that the new Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney will call a snap election up north on April the 28th. And so that broke this afternoon. We're going to have elections to the north, and we'll find out whether or not Pierre Poilievre or Mark Carney is going to be leading our Canadian neighbor for the next many years, along with Donald Trump. We also had President Trump in the Oval today announcing, along with Secretary Hegseth, the plans to build a new next-generation fighter plane. Pete Hegseth, cut number 8.
Well, Mr. President, this is a big day. This is a big day for our warfighters. This is a big day for our country, a big day in the world. The name of this program is the Next Generation of Air Dominance. And Mr. President, because of your leadership, your clarity, America is going to have a generations in the future of air dominance.
It's called the F-47. We'll talk more about that as we get details. Now I want to introduce you to John Ellis, because I'm going to do something new going forward on Fridays. John's been a guest before. He's a longtime newsman. He's the real deal. He's been doing news longer than I have, which means he's been doing news a long time. And John puts out news items every day. It's the last thing I read before I go on the air. That's why I know that Mark Carney's going to call a snap election on April 28th. John, welcome. Would you first tell people about what News Items is and what service you're providing and why I rushed to invest in it when you launched it and why I use it every day?
Well, News Items is a morning newsletter. It tries to come out before 6:45 a.m. Eastern Time. The slogan of it is interesting, important, or both. So we report stories that we find interesting, important, or both. And we cover 4 major areas. One we call World in Disarray. The second we call the financialization of everything. The third we call advances in science and technology. And the fourth we call politics, foreign and domestic.
And the reason I find it invaluable is that there are too many news sources, and I don't know who to trust. And you do that. You are now sort of the editor to the world. So what I asked John to consider doing, we're going to try it out, is on Friday in the first segment of the show for him to tell us what he thinks was the most important news of the week that's coming to a close. So, John, you have the floor. What mattered most to you this week?
Well, I thought the biggest story of the week was the not peace in Ukraine. President Putin seemed to not move 1 inch in the negotiations with President Trump. President Zelensky did pretty much what President Trump asked him to do, but it seems to have not moved the ball very much. So I thought that was important because obviously it has implications across Europe and indeed across the world.
This morning's newsletter included, by the way, a lot of details about reciprocal attacks on each other's country's energy infrastructure. So clearly there's no ceasefire.
No ceasefire, no. In fact, after the call between Trump and Putin, within 3 hours, Russia launched a major assault on Ukrainian energy facilities in numerous cities. So it was a short peace, let's put it that way.
What is story number 2?
Well, the story number 2 is related, which is the Chinese had a Chinese had a D-Day style test in which they tested these barges, which was practice for an amphibious landing in the South China Sea, and everybody saw it as a sort of a practice for perhaps invading Taiwan. It was staged, appropriately at the time of the non-peace in Ukraine, and it's the Trump administration is probably 90% focused on China and Taiwan, and this was a story that supported the view that they should be mostly focused on what's going on in China and
Secretary
Taiwan.
Rubio was my guest yesterday, and he said the story of the 21st century will be the story of the United States' relationship with China. I agree with that. But I also think we're probably going to end up in a war. Certainly, we're in a Cold War right now and lurching kind of towards a hot war. What do you think, John?
Oh, I think we're definitely in a Cold War. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I do think that China is having severe difficulties with its economy, and that exporting their excess capacity, all that steel they make, all that cement they make, all of the cars, so forth, uh, buy it. And war is not good for that. So if there's something that constrains it, it's probably, um, economic slowdown, economic non-performance, whatever you want to call it. That said, there's, the Chinese government and President Xi have been fairly explicit in their desire, A, to quote, repatriate, end quote, Taiwan, and also to spread China's sphere of influence. So it comes down, it seems to me, to Taiwan. If China invades Taiwan, right now we have a policy of strategic ambiguity, meaning if China attacks, maybe we'll come to Taiwan's defense and maybe we won't. It's strategically ambiguous, and so don't try it. There are a lot of people calling for, I think there are a lot of the Trump administration who are for strategic certainty, which is to say, if China does invade Taiwan or blockade Taiwan, that the U.S. will definitely get involved. The that's sort of the crux of the matter. Is it strategic ambiguity or is it strategic certainty? I don't think the Trump administration has come to a final conclusion on that, but there's certainly a lot of people in the administration who believe that strategic certainty is the way to go.
Now, John Ellis, one of the reasons I love news items is that you do tell me about the Chinese economy, and that is not often covered everywhere. It's really struggling. It's struggling on a lot of different fronts in its real estate sector, in its export sector, in its demographic uh, future. Does Wall Street price that in very well? Do they have enough transparency into what's going on in China to be able to price China correctly?
I think it's hard, but I think they're certainly they're certainly not great believers in the official numbers. Let's put it that way. I think that I think the markets, quote unquote, believe that China worked their way out of the crisis. Larger problem is, you know, Chinese men and women aren't getting married. They seem to have lost a lot of confidence in the future. There seems to be a lot of confidence in the regime. They're hard to get for people coming from rural and ex-urban communities. Local tax revenues are down. I mean, indicator after indicator indicable, and a economy, as we know, leads to political instability, which in the case of communist China means ever harder, ever harsher crackdowns. Given all that, I'm not sure that Wall Street can be fully confident of what they see, but I don't think unless they're on the side, sure they can be.
What about
Clearly,
the third story? Let's move on to story number 3 in the news items world.
the third story to me was pointed out by Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary under President Clinton, and a sort of an understudy to Bob Rubin when he was the Secretary of the Treasury. And he pointed out in an interview with Bloomberg that the Federal Reserve, the Jay Powell had his briefing and they put out their statement. They kept the rates steady, and Powell said nice words about the economy holding up and so on and so forth. But within that, it turned out that the Fed had slashed its cap for how much in treasuries it let rolls off its balance sheet in a month to $5 billion from $25 billion. So the phrase for this is quantitative tightening, in which the Fed gets, pairs off the the debt that they've been carrying since the financial crisis and the pandemic, and they've been trying to offload this debt for some time, and the rolling average, if you will, was 25 billion per month. And this time it was 5 billion, which indicates that the Fed is a lot less confident in the economy than.
John, what did you make Larry Summer to be saying about what the Fed chair, Mr. Powell, was not saying? I mean, what are the winks and the nods and the clues adding up to?
Well, if you're feeling confident about the economy and the growth of the economy, then you would, in theory, move this Treasury debt to the private market at the sort of announced rate of 25 billion per. That suddenly was changed to 5 billion per, and the way Mr. Summers interpreted that is that, given that Powell gave no indication that quantitative tightening would decline, if you will, that indicates some lack of confidence in where the economy is going, and that's not, it doesn't contradict what he said in the press conference, but it adds context. And if the Fed is looking at it more skeptically than perhaps they let on, that's worth noting.
Worrisome stuff. John Ellis, thank you so much. Thank you for news items. It keeps me going every single morning, and I recommend it to everyone out there who's listening to the Weekend Pod or to the Hugh Hewitt Show. If you want to know what the news is, we live in a meteor strike a minute of news, and you just got to know what's real and what's AI generated, CGI, fabricated news. John does that for you. Thank you, John Ellis. Once a week, I bring you the State of the States report because of our sponsor, the American Legislative Exchange Council. And a lot goes on in the States, but Jonathan Williams, our friend, who is the president and chief economist as well at ALEC, joins me from inside the Beltway as he keeps an eye on all 50 states. Good Friday to you, Jonathan. How are you?
Well, it has been an incredible week, hasn't it, my friend? What a week in America with the education order and everything else going on.
Well, let's start with the education order. Last night, President Trump signs an executive order on Thursday night saying we're shutting down the Department of Education. Now, you and I both know it's a creature of law, so he cannot do that unilaterally. But what can he do unilaterally, John Williams?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, what the order essentially does is give a nod to that, to say we're going to do what we can. And, obviously last week the secretary had made the announcements on the downsizing of some of the FTEs within the department. Lisa Nelson, our CEO, and I and a group were there meeting with the secretary's team this week at the agency. And it was just an incredible meeting to talk about ways that we can, it's more about, I think, shifting the burden of this away from Washington, away from the bureaucracy, and giving states and ultimately parents the opportunity. Because Hugh, you and I have talked about this a lot, where we have seen the education freedom revolution sweep this nation. And ALEC and our partners have been a key part of that, and our legislators leading the way. And just as of a few days ago, we had now 15 states become universal education freedom states across the country. And of course, what this order does is it puts more emphasis on that and the competition and just the ability of states to make those changes to benefit kids at the end of the day and take away some of the unneeded bureaucracy that exists in Washington. And of course, what the order does secondly is it says now to the men and women in Congress, with Speaker Mike Johnson and Leader Thune and others, then you all can take and codify this when it comes to items that need to be handled from congressional oversight.
Now, Jonathan, what's very interesting to me about this is the position it puts Alex in. The American Legislative Exchange Council represents legislators, right? They're state legislators all over this country. I don't know how many thousands of them there are, but the smart ones belong to ALEC. And by the way, if you want to get a weekly newsletter on what's going on at the states, go to alex.org/Hugh, alec.org. It's alec.org, alec.org/Hugh, and they'll send it to you. So you represent legislators. Legislators don't like executive branch people telling them what to do. So I'm wondering if you're hearing from your membership, we're not happy with the idea of governors shutting down agencies that we stood up? Is there a tension here?
I think the overall goal and the sentiment that we get from legislators, or just on the phone with many of them in the last several days, is nearly unanimous support for this idea. And yes, I mean, while there needs to be a robust discussion around balance of powers, both vertical and horizontal federalism, and making sure that the legislative branch ends up having its say, the overall goal of making sure that we get out of this failed approach of doing education at the federal level. That was the unfinished business of Ronald Reagan, as you know well, and is now being courageously addressed by Donald Trump and by members in the U.S. House and Senate. Now's the time to reverse course on what has been a failing education bureaucracy for more than 40 years. We have these NAEP scores that just came out, Hugh, the nation's report card, that show that more than 70% of eighth graders can't do math or reading at grade level. Now, the definition of insanity is doing something over and over again and expecting a different result. So, the method of getting there, I'm sure there'll be some debate around that, but I think the end goal is we want to see states and ultimately parents and families empowered.
Well, I think one of the options open to the president and the speaker and Leader Thune is to score the savings from shutting down the Department of Education and attach it to the Budget and Reconciliation and hope it gets past the Senate parliamentarian. Do you think that's what they're going to try and do, Jonathan Williams?
Well, I think they should. I was just talking with Congressman Eric Burleson, one of our 100 members of the current Congress who are ALEC alums. Asked him about that question a little bit earlier today on our ALEC Government Efficiency Coalition, and I think he thought that was the right approach as well. It's a common sense approach to say these are real savings. They should be included in any kind of a CBO situation as it relates to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and other things that we need to do to get our fiscal house in order.
Now, what happens to the money that the Department of Education has been sending to the states? Is it just going to be block granted? And you might even want to explain for the benefit of our Steelers fans what that means to block grant money.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the money's not going away. What's going away is the bureaucracy. And I think that's the essential part of it is that you talk to folks at the Department of Education, they cite studies that show upwards of 50% of education spending can be lost in compliance costs. I mean, so if we directly send this to the states in a block grant, like you mentioned, which is something that, in our view, it should be minimal, if any strings attached to it, and allow states to be these laboratories of democracy and innovate. And yes, we might not like all the decisions that states make, but that's okay. And this idea of competitive federalism that we have, if New York and California royally mess up the way that they spend these federal funds, then the taxpayers are going to continue voting with their feet away from those kind of states and go to the freedom-loving states, just like we point out in rich states, poor states every year. So in our perfect, I think, scenario is the dollars stay for education, but they're sent to states without strings to take those dollars and use them for the ability to help parents make those choices for their own children.
Boy, I hope that the leadership is listening because they could write the reconciliation instructions that way. Well, last question, Jonathan. And again, alec.org/Hugh, ALEC.org/Hugh if you want your weekly newsletter on what's going on in the states. Who won the most on the education issues in the states in recent months or in the last year? Where did we really get breakthroughs?
Well, the Wall Street Journal this week, Governor Ron DeSantis had a great piece where he cited ALEC research and our index of education freedom and parental empowerment that you can find on our website. Encourage everybody to check that out. Florida's ranked number one in that report for another year. Obviously, it was a leader starting with Jeb Bush way back, but Florida has been the number one ranked state. It's been a state that's continued to stay at the top, but there's a lot of competition at the top, Hugh, and now 15 states are universal states. If you how many states just several years ago, you'd have been at Florida and Arizona. And now we've had 13 others join that because of the work of our ALEC members and so many of our partners across the country. That is a story that does not get told nearly enough around this town, but it's one that one of the things I'm most optimistic about in the 20 years that I've done this.
We're going to keep talking about it every single week in our State of the State reports. Go get the weekly newsletter at alec.org/Hugh. Find out what's going on in your state. And if you're a state legislator or you know one, they should join ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, alec.org. Matt Continenti joins me. He is, of course, part of the Commentary Podcasting fraternity that I listen to every morning. He's at the American Enterprise Institute, the Washington Free Beacon, and a friend of the program. Matt, Good Friday to you. A lot to cover. I want to start, though, with yesterday's commentary podcast. Thanks for the shout out, along with Turley and McCarthy and those of us who opine about the law. But I want to push back a little bit against you guys. You're hesitant to talk about con law. There are real lawyers like Andy and Turley. They're prosecutors and defense counsel, and that's a world unto themselves. And there are civil litigation experts, and I do endangered species and clean water, and that's technical stuff. But con law is not supposed to be reserved for lawyers. It's supposed to be, it was written by farmers for a citizenry that's supposed to understand it. I'm a little bit leery of pundits pulling back from having opinions on the Constitution because we're all supposed to understand it. You get my point?
I do, and I agree. The Constitution is for all of us, and it's easily accessible, and you can read it with a simple Google search, and so it shouldn't stop us from having opinions. I do think in some of these controversies, Hugh, surrounding the deportations, surrounding immigration issues, you can go from a general constitutional standpoint to the niceties and details of statutes very quickly. And so that's why it's incumbent on people who comment and analyze the news to take in a broad set of perspectives and try to think through these issues themselves.
Yeah, whenever I hear someone start spouting off precedents on air and Youngstown Seat and Tube or Dames and More or this or that or Bemidine, I think to myself, no, tell me what you're really saying. Are you saying the president has the authority to do this or not? Because that's what it comes down to. And on this question of the deportations, I spent an hour last night with my old boss at the White House in the Reagan Council's era, talking about the fact that in that era, Ted Olson would have come over from the Department of Justice and sat down with Fred Fielding, and they would have pulled up the future Chief Justice, who was an associate counsel. They would have left me down doing the minor scrub work, but they would have talked about this for a long time. Do you think there's a legal team with a legal strategy that is full of serious people plotting this out?
I think there's definitely serious people both in the White House and at DOJ and at DHS who are thinking through the various ways in which they can solve the immigration crisis in this country, a crisis that really culminated under Joe Biden's open border for 4 years. And so they're taking different approaches. And that's why I think we have to often be very particular about what we're talking about. So there's the case, of course, of Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia graduate student who was involved in the pro-Hamas activity on Columbia's campus. And so that's one deportation proceeding. Then, of course, there's the really kind of electric case involving some 250 members of the Tren de Aragua gang who were flown out of the country to El Salvador and the fight with Judge Boasberg. That's a separate issue. And so we have to kind of think, all right, is the administration following one strategy when they're taking away visas, trying to deport students who are engaged in anti-Semitic conduct on campus? And what's that strategy? And then what's the strategy with the Alien Enemies Act, which the administration invoked on these 3 flights of the Venezuelans to El Salvador? And is that going to be a long-term strategy? So we just have to take one at a time, I think. I
agree with that. I am a little bit nervous that a lot of plates are being juggled and balls are in the air at one time, and that something could drop. And I use as my worst case scenario that the Venezuelans are being sent to El Salvador where they might be disappeared by a rival gang. We don't want to send people to their death, right? We don't rendition people to justice systems that aren't justice systems. I don't think that happened here. And Secretary Rubio told me that he discussed it with President Bukele. But we really don't want to be in the business of sending people in the country illegally to, say, Argentinians junta in the 70s, right?
As a matter of principle, no. Also, you want to know who you're sending.
That's a good point.
Who you're deporting. I want to start there. And I think one of the points of controversy in this case is we're still not entirely, we have some of the names of the people on the flights, but we're still not entirely clear where were they in the immigration process. Had they already gone through due process? Had they already been found to be illegally residing in the country? Did we know that that they were gang members? Once we have those facts, I think we'll be able to see that the law is on the Trump administration side as well as the politics.
Yeah, Judge Boasberg is asking for details like that as we speak. It'll be an interesting weekend in that court. Matt Continetti, I'm curious as to where are you? You look like you're in the holding room of The Wire. You got this calendar behind you, and where are you?
AEI. This is my AEI office. So there's not as many books visible as is the case when I come to you from my home office. But yes,
well, I'm very glad to see AEI is not wasting its budget on interior decoration. It really does look like
behind me, Hugh. It's multi-use. Behind me, that blank space is actually a whiteboard where I could, if I wanted to, pull out a dry erase marker and jot down all my ideas. So we have a lot of different ways to come up with our ideas here at the American.
I'll tell you right now, you could be a Stasi agent in the basement of a dilapidated Berlin walk-up right now, listening to the people upstairs. So I would send that to you. All right, second topic, Matt. Secretary Rubio was my guest for the first time in this capacity as Secretary of State this week. And we began with China and we ended with China. And he said the story of the 21st century will be China. To me, it's the number one story. And a question occurred to me that I want to pose to you. Do you think Xi is telling Putin what to do and not do in Russia?
I'm not sure if he's explicit. I think that there is a understanding between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. I think they get along very well. Putin views Xi as a patron in many ways, as a source of technology, as a source of economic support. And I think Xi Jinping views Vladimir Putin as the attack dog, as someone who is taking explicit kinetic steps to disrupt the American-led international system. And when you look at some of the rhetoric that comes from Xi Jinping, he talks about this unlimited partnership between the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation. And he also has said that there are things happening in the world today that have not happened in 100 years. And so I don't know if he's telling Vladimir Putin what to do exactly, but I do think that he's very supportive of Vladimir Putin. And of course, it's not just China and Russia. As you know, Hugh, Iran is an integral partner in this new axis of aggressors, supplying China with energy and also Russia with drones and missiles.
And I also wonder, I can't imagine that the North Koreans would be in Russia without Xi's approval. Do you think that could have happened without Xi giving a green light?
You know, again, I'm sure he was aware of it. I've been researching this angle myself over the years. It's still unclear to me, Hugh, how much authority China has over North Korea. The Kim family, as we know, is very eccentric, very erratic, and I think sometimes they make moves. Kim Jong-un makes moves that even might rattle Xi Jinping's cage. As surprising as that might sound.
We're playing music from Matt Continetti's prison cell. Can you hear it, Matt? The White Room. We really think we got to get you some. We got to get you some drapes or
get
something.
A backdrop or something. Yeah.
All right. So let me talk to you a little bit about a political issue. I listened to the Ruthless podcast yesterday, and they talked about the fact that Democrats are almost automatically taking the 20 side of every 80-20 issue. And they're now caught in an iron triangle of gender radicalism, support for domestic terrorism, whether it's Tesla terrorists or Hamas supporters, and climate justice extremism. They're really trapped, so that Chuck Schumer, he's on The View looking like a fool, but what has happened to the Democrats? Do they have a way out of this trap? They're trapped on the left, I think. What's your assessment of that assessment?
No, I think the Democrats are headed potentially for a McGovern moment. Just as after the 1968 election and Nixon's great comeback, the Democrats were pulled in many directions over war in Vietnam, over the rise in the counterculture and inability to cope with Nixon's popularity and his message of law and order. They eventually nominate George McGovern, who was far to the left of the American mainstream 4 years later in 1972. I think we're seeing something like that develop on the Democratic side today, Hugh, where Democrats clearly are just beginning to recognize the defeat in 2024, and their response, rather than acceptance or modification, is a huge tantrum, is anger. And you see that in these town halls. These town halls, the ones in the Republican districts, are left-wingers who are organized shouting at Republicans. But the ones in the Democratic districts are the Democratic voters shouting at the Democrats for not fighting hard enough. And to look at the response to Chuck Schumer after he made the right decision and the responsible decision, and the politically smart decision, I'd add, to not shut the government down last week, you see that the two most prominent faces on the Democratic side today are Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. All of the type of low-grade domestic terrorism that you mentioned, Tesla, the environmental radicalism. This is a party, I think, that's headed in exactly the wrong direction it needs to be if it wants to get its act together for 2026.
I have a proposition that I want to test out on you. They lost the media when they lost X. When Elon got a hold of X, X is actually the spinal cord of information distribution in the United States. Lots of people get information from lots of places. I listen to your podcast every morning at Commentary. I listen to National Review. I read Ellis items, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times. But X tells me a lot. Signal and noise, obviously. But when the left lost control of the ability to control the flow of information, they lost the script. What do you think of my proposition?
Yeah, and I think there's something to it, and it's not just Elon Musk obtaining X and owning it and turning it into this free speech forum. It's also the Twitter files, him going back and talking about the social media giants' collusion with the government to censor viewpoints, especially with COVID. And I would point to COVID, too, as another factor where the Democrats just lost it in two directions. One, COVID, the pandemic summer was the summer of George Floyd, and the reaction to the death of George Floyd sent the Democrats in a radical direction on race issues and crime, in handling crime. And then two, the COVID was a moment of radical transparency for American parents to see what's happening inside the American education system, and American parents were horrified. And so there, too, the Democrats and liberals lost a lot of their legitimacy because American families were saying, you're indoctrinating our kids. And by the way, they're getting dumber anyway.
Matt, have you seen, I told my audience that I'd be covering this next week. I just want to know if you know of the case of Foote versus Ludlow School District. It's a First Circuit opinion, 3-0 per curiam opinion, came down a month ago out of the Massachusetts First Circuit Court. It covers New England. And it dismissed a parent's claim for damages after they had instructed the teacher, the superintendent, everybody by mail not to do gender with their daughter. The school concealed a gender transition. I mean, they concealed it. It's Soviet-style East German taking control of your kids, and it's a mutiny because the First Circuit, these three judges, two Biden judges with a total of maybe 4 years experience and an Obama judge, they simply reject long-standing, you have to believe me on this, long-standing settled black law precedent on the right of parents to control their children's education. The two cases called Meyer and Pierce. They mutiny. They reject it. And it's also one of the worst written opinions I've ever seen. Do you think maybe the resistance has moved into robes?
Yeah. Well, I had heard about that case, Hugh, because I'm a loyal listener of this program. So you educated me in that case earlier this week. I think I had heard about it in the news as well. It's a sign that the judges, especially the judges that Obama and Biden put in, have a very radical view of their role. Their role is not to actually get the law right. Their role is to create new law, and to create new law that's in alignment with the radical agenda of the progressive left. And so I think when voters see this and are confronted with these facts, they react very negatively. And this is why I think the Trump administration understands that its current fight with Judge Boasberg in the D.C. Circuit Court is politically advantageous, even if legally it may be somewhat tenuous. And it's because most Americans say, look, we put Donald Trump in office for two reasons: get prices lower and clean out the country of the criminal illegal aliens who flooded in during Biden's open border. And the public's willing to give Trump a lot of leeway to do that. If these judges are seen to get in the way, then I think you're going to have political consequences coming from Congress. And I would hope eventually that the Supreme Court would step in on these national injunctions as well.
Matt, I have one more question. I had Seth Mandel, your colleague from the Commentary podcast, on yesterday, and I asked him point blank. I'm not Jewish. I follow Israel because they're our strategic ally, the equal of any in the world, and they're a free country in the Middle East, and they're part of the alliance of good guys. But my gosh, it's very unsettling what's going. They actually have a constitutional crisis. They've got crazy stuff going on, and they've got a war going on. Are you worried about the stability of the Jewish state?
I'm slightly worried. I think I was a little bit worried more during the crisis over the proposed judicial reform prior to October 7th, 2023. Israeli politics is always very chaotic, and Israel's always facing threats. So those two conditions haven't really changed, though I do agree that it's becoming intense now on the domestic front. But I think overall, I think Israel has a great moment here to seize the opportunity to finally call out Hamas for dragging its feet during the ceasefire, to take the fight back to Hamas, to try to use force in order to get Hamas to release the remaining living hostages. And we also know now that Israel has the green light from the United States of America. We saw Trump order the attacks on the Houthis in Yemen, which are still ongoing, and then the resumption of the war in Gaza. And I think this is good for both countries. It makes the world safer. And I think it's also the prelude to the showdown with Iran in the coming weeks.
In the coming, that's I would not be surprised, Matt, by the time we talk next week or the week thereafter, if Donald Trump has pulled the trigger on Iran, because I think he's about had it. Would you be surprised if that happens?
No, I don't know the exact timing, of course, but we know from his letter to the Ayatollah that he said, this is your make or break moment. You're either going to come in and begin proposing a negotiation that would lead to the actual verified end of your nuclear program, or you're going to face consequences. And I also thought that Trump's statement in relation to the Houthis earlier this week is very important as well, because he was saying these operations against the Houthi militia, which has shut down shipping in the Red Sea, are ongoing. And he warned Iran. He said, if we see you supplying them, we're going to take out your naval vessels as well. So he's putting Iran
I think
on
we're
notice,
at
and
that
I think it's
cusp.
about time.
We'll check back next Friday. Matt Continetti, thank you. Follow him on X at Continetti. Listen to him on the Commentary Podcast.
The Hugh Hewitt Show returns in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I do want to check markets as we come up close to the close of the day and the week. Brought to you by American Federal. 1-800-221-7694. If you're going to buy or sell gold today, do it with my friend Nick Grovich at 1-800-221-7694. The Dow is off 0.01% as the market closes today. The S&P is up 0.03%. And the NASDAQ is up about 0.33%. So a very quiet Friday. Gold, though, dropped to $3,025 an ounce. Now, earlier in the week, it was getting a little bit I just couldn't believe it. It can't go up every day, and it's been going up, 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 up. I want to emphasize to everyone, I don't give financial advice, but I give advice on where to go to buy gold if you're going to buy gold. Do it with Nick Grovich and his team at AmericanFederal.com because they're transparent. They've been doing it for 40 plus years. It's very simple. Here's the spot price of gold. Here's the commission I'm going to charge you. Oh, you want to sell me gold? Let's see what you got. Is it a gold watch? Is it a gold bracelet? Is it a gold earring? How much is it? Is it 1424? Whatever. Have you got some coins lying around? The only time you really need a coin specialist like Nick to give you really, really expert advice is when you've got a piece of collectability that you have no idea what it's worth. And then you need someone you can trust, and that's Nick. Otherwise, you can find what the price of gold is, and then you're just talking about commission, and you're talking about diversification and buying of selling of precious metals. Do it with AmericanFederal.com. Interesting week in the markets. The world does not know what's going on. Also an interesting week in El Salvador, and I want to remind everyone this is Lent, and this is Friday, so Catholics are not supposed to eat meat today, but they're also supposed to do things, as all Christians are, in observance of the seasons of penance. And one of the things you can do is give money to Food for the Poor. You can text my name, Hewitt, Hewitt, to 51555 if you want to donate to Food for the Poor. $100 will feed one child for an entire year. Give a listen to this volunteer.
I just wanted to say I really admire your work with Food for the Poor each year. And I'm 16 years old. I live at home, so I don't really make a whole lot of money. But I have an envelope that I keep on my nightstand, and each time I do get some money, I put a little bit away throughout the year, maybe like $1 or $2, and it's for Food for the Poor. And so this year I saved up $80 to give, and I'm not saying any of this to brag. I just wanted to encourage your listeners who probably make more money than I do. And so
called me 2 years ago, and I have used that tape again and again because I'm what a wonderful thing. Thank you, Sarah, wherever you are. You're probably in college now. Thank you for the $80. You're feeding children every day, and you can be like Sarah. You can call, by the way, 855-359-4673, 855-359-4673. Or just go to HughHewitt.com and find that banner at the top, Feed Their Future. Ben, good Friday to you. I hope you had a great St. Patrick's Day dance with your little girl.
I absolutely did. And you know what? The other dance is going for me pretty well right now as well because, knock on wood, I've only gotten 3 wrong, and none of them are more than one step deep. So,
oh, very good. Oh, very, very good. Let me talk to you about, since you're the parent of a young girl, I'm going to spend a lot of time in the next few weeks talking about a lawsuit called Foote versus Ludlow School Committee. Have you heard about this yet?
Yes, I have. But so, in terms of what your understanding is, well, I'll let you.
An 11-year-old girl begins to transition. Yep. Her parents tell the school, "Thank you very much for alerting to us. We're going to handle this. We're going to get counselors. Do not encourage her. Don't use the pronouns. Don't use any of that stuff." And the school blows off the parents and engage in a secret, a conspiracy, actually.
And one that is clearly intentional to hide what they are doing from the parents, which is the aspect of this that I think sticks so much in the craw of everyone. And let me take a step back and say, when I say everyone, I really do mean everyone. The people who are offended, about this are not just social conservatives. It's people who believe that they, ought to be having the authority in terms of directing the upbringing of their children generally, and that includes a lot of people who are solidly Democratic voters. And I would just say, having experienced most recently in terms of interactions with, people in schools in very blue areas, I will say this is something that cuts across a lot of traditional Democratic constituencies in a way that they are deeply uncomfortable with.
And I want to add, I'm not actually bringing this up to talk about the gender fluidity issue. I very rarely do that on the air because parents get uncomfortable, kids are coming home from school. I don't want to lose audience. I'm bringing it up because of the way the First Circuit handled it. The parents sued the school district. The district court dismissed the case under 42 U.S.C. 1983, and it went up to the appeals court. And 3 judges, 2 of them Biden judges with a combined 4 years experience on the bench, and 1 an Obama judge, ruled dramatically for the school district, and they did in a way, you have to trust me on this, of mutiny. They mutinied. They absolutely rejected longstanding precedents that are black letter law about the right of parents to control the upbringing of their children. None of them would sign it. They signed it per curiam because none of the three judges want to own it. It may be the worst written legal opinion I've read in 30 years. I mean, it's really childish. You would be shocked. As an editor, you ought to read Foote v. Ludlow School Committee, Ben, because you'll just say this isn't real.
You're going to make my brain hurt.
It is so bad, and I'm wondering, do you think the resistance is Don Robes?
I think that this is a situation of a different kind of lawfare than we experienced in the first 4 years, meaning that the Democrats are flailing at this moment. You see it. I see it. The fact that Chuck Schumer is having to actually make phone calls to get people to back him publicly is an astounding event. And I think that can you imagine Nancy Pelosi doing that?
No,
that's absurd. And so they are flailing. They don't know which direction to go. They're at odds with over not just these issues but other issues as well. And so because of that, I think it's given a feeling of license to the resistance-minded folks who are, inhabiting Robes at the moment, to feel like, this is the way that I can stand up in this moment. I can be a hero for the cause, and damn the law, damn any of the things that I, swore to uphold. I'm just going to do it anyway. And I think that has, in a short-term effect, it may be pleasing for them, but in the long term, it is absolutely toxic for the country.
Yeah, and I'm not easily shaken. I believe in the rule of law. I was poo-pooing people demanding the impeachment of Judge Boasberg, et cetera. I agreed with the Chief Justice because I believe eventually it will work out. But I read a First Circuit opinion like this, and I realize maybe these younger ideologues who got confirmed during the Biden years when Biden didn't really know who he was putting on the bench, maybe they're radical. And maybe the radicals are finally on the court. They marched through the long march through the institution.
This is the danger. This is the danger for institutionalists and like you, Hugh, who want to see the courts restored in terms of their position, their proper position within the American constitutional order, which is that if you have these radicals take over it and flout the law so directly and so blatantly that the average American understands that there's something deeply wrong going on, then the case for something like impeachment becomes a lot easier to make to constituents across the country who don't have the same barriers to that, who don't have the same knowledge of history that you do, certainly, and that many others do. And look, I am all for, I've been in the position generally that we should have more impeachments of federal officials. I don't like impeachments of judges for slightly different reasons. I would point out that, as you know, second impeachment that ever happened in the founding generation was of a judge who could not fulfill his job, was clearly corrupted by politics, and also showed up drunk repeatedly, and admitted so from the bench, in fact. So it's one of the things
that was Pickering. Chase was the second. Yes. Chase was the political one, and that's the one that failed. And I'm glad it failed.
So my view is this. If we're going to have a conversation about the impeachment of the judges, I just think we have a broader conversation about the number of district court judges that we have, the number of people who have been invested in this power, and whether that's something that actually is part of what the American system ought to be and how it ought to work. I'm not sure that the people in Congress, though, are prepared to have that conversation.
Oh, they're not.
I certainly don't think that. It's a lot easier to posture and just call for the impeachment of these folks, even though we know, just given the political numbers, that that's not going to lead to anything in terms of an ultimate outcome, and in fact could distract from the kind of speedy agenda that this Congress and this president need in order to achieve things.
But I must say, I was so whipsawed yesterday because I wrote a long column defending the Chief Justice's rejection of impeachment and why we don't want that and why we want to approach institutional rule of law. And then I read this decision out of left field, and it's mutiny, and it's throwing stuff overboard, and the pirates are on the ship. And I said, maybe I have misjudged the depth of the problem. Now, let's go to the left. The left has caught themselves now in an iron triangle, I call it, of gender radicalism of the sort we were just talking about. Then we've got domestic terrorism, whether it's Tesla terrorism or supporting Hamas and Jew hunting on campuses, and climate justice extremism. they're actually, I missed how far to the left they went because I was focused on the infirmity of Joe Biden, but their party went nuts.
Well, and I think that part of that, too, by the way, is due to the lack of leadership within their party. You and I, both know the importance of statesmanship and the importance of leadership. And those leaders are able to offer the people, especially the radicals and those who might engage in such behavior as this, something that, approaches a form of healthy resistance that I think the Democrats are not capable of offering in this moment, because they are dealing with a left wing that is so out of touch, that is so radical that, look, I'll be quite honest with you. I've passed by multiple Teslas today, including 2 Cybertrucks, just in my Fridays when I run a lot of errands for the family.
Yeah.
And each time I've been sort of keeping my head on a swivel, seeing is somebody going to come out of nowhere and swipe at these folks, or are they going to throw something at them? Because that's a totally believable incident to happen in this day and age, which is absurd. And look, my opinion is when you start blowing things up, that's when you go to jail. That's not about free speech or the lawful resistance that people ought to engage in. That is an act of, whether you want to call it anti-corporate terror or something else. It's completely unacceptable, and it deserves a total crack.
And the context is, 8 months ago, Donald Trump was shot in the head. Corey Compatore was murdered. 6 months ago, a second assassination attempt. The context is rising violence. And, of course, on our campuses, I'm very glad to see Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche and Kash Patel and Dan Bongino find the 3 terrorists and arrest them the day after the Tesla attacks. Were you surprised that they acted that quickly?
Well, I'm glad that they did, because I think that they have their priorities straight and they understand a message needs to be sent that you're not going to get away with this. And we cannot afford to slide into a situation where we have a rump, form of the democratic leftist regime that wants to reenact that period of bombings that happened, as we know, within your lifetime, and is not that long ago. In terms of
I can remember the townhouse blowing up in Manhattan. I can remember Madison, University of Wisconsin-Madison building blowing up. I'm a kid. I'm in junior high. Santa Barbara Bank building. Kent State happened 40 miles from my house. I don't want to go back there.
It's not that long ago, and it's not possible. It's not impossible for us to just slip back into that. I really do believe that.
I do too. I want to ask you about my theory. That's what's happened to the Democrats. They're traumatized. They lost the media overnight. When Elon Musk took over X, the legacy media was exposed as shaky and without influence, and X was was revealed as the spinal cord of information distribution, and they no longer controlled it. And I think they're traumatized. What do you think?
I think that's a good summation of what's happened, but I also think that there's something else that's happened attendant with that, which is that what his purchase revealed was that there were a lot of people entirely outside of the normal strictures of the media career pipeline who were willing to say what they truly believed about all manner of things. And what I mean by that is, I think that the media as a whole depended on a certain pipeline existence. Folks would go to the right schools. They would go through the right fellowships. They would come out at the end of that, and even if they went and worked for a conservative or right-leaning publication in some sense, Wall Street Journal or some of these other ones, they would always have in the back of their mind that, hey, if I want to end up at any of these other places, I need to be careful about what I say. I need to be careful about, restricting their, anybody's awareness of what I truly believe about things. And I need to toe the line when it's clear that there's not something that I should break away from for the sake of my career. And so what you had with these podcasters, with these independent journalists, with Substackers and the like, is people who had essentially broken away or never were part of that pipeline in the first place. And because of that, they owe none of that fealty that exists, I think, as an overarching thing for media.
Oh, that's interesting.
And instead, they can act truly independently, and that is extremely dangerous to the leftist regime.
Yeah, they have no muscle memory of conformity to the elite dominant opinion regime. And so
exactly.
There were assumptions about all sorts of ways of thinking that you could depart from and be at National Review or go with R. Emmett Terrell and crusade a little bit at the Heritage Foundation, but your muscle memory was still New York Times, Washington Post. That's all gone.
Yes, exactly. And that's all gone, and it's not coming back. And I think that they just woke up to the fact, really 6 months ago, that it's not coming back. And that is terrifying to them.
Well, it might mean that their leaders are really AOC and people to her left. And if that's the case, we're in the middle of a transition. They're going to be the Whigs. You can't win on that platform.
Hugh, I know I've mentioned it before, but when I talk to the more radical Democrats who I still know, when I see what they're posting, they're more interested in Jasmine Crockett than they are with it, trying to find anybody who can actually win back the center. And because of this, I think that they have very little in terms of what they want to offer the other side, and they truly rejoice when they see the kinds of things happening with Teslas and the like. When you see, the sort of the what was once considered kind of the mainstream of their party just kind of nodding their heads on it, that's a sign.
Yep. Ben Domenech is my guest. He is, of course, editor-at-large for The Spectator, Fox News contributor. He has his own podcast, which I think should be longer and more frequent, Ben, but that's just me.
I actually share that opinion, Hugh. Working on it.
Oh, well, I just think that you ought to get a group of your buddies. In fact, unsolicited advice. The Ruthless podcast has demonstrated to me that 4 friends talking who know what they're talking about makes for the best podcast if they're smart. And so you get your 3 best friends and sit down and talk for an hour and a half, and you'll be up there doing the same thing that Ruthless is. You know that this actually, interviewing people takes some time and preparation to do it well. And so Secretary of State Rubio came in this week, and I prepared, and I began and I ended with China quite intentionally, because to me, we're in a war with China. Right now, it's a Cold War. It could be a hot war at any time. And his statement was that the 21st century will be the story of China and America. And we don't know what that story is going to be. Do you think Donald Trump believes that?
I think on a certain level that he does, but I also think that he believes that in this moment, what he has an opportunity to do is to dramatically expand the American footprint and obligation as he sees it, which is the project of the Western Hemisphere, in anticipation of something that may come after he is gone. And by that, I don't think he thinks that the Chinese are going to move on his watch. I think he has kind of faith in his own presence being a deterrent. But I think that he also understands that the threat that they represent is not going to be one that is held off for long, and that there has to be movements made within this beginning period to balance against that. I think that that's his understanding. Whether that's accurate or not, is up to you. But I do think that one of the things that he truly does understand is that his position right now is essentially setting the preparatory steps to make sure that we have the resources that we need, that we have the nuclear submarines that we need, that we have the resources in place already, because we're not going to be able to supply, Taiwan or anybody else in the region in terms of our allies, which is actually, from my perspective, more important in terms of preparing them for what their obligations are going to be, is something that has to be done now. It's not the same situation as in Europe where you can actually run things over ground.
I am thinking maybe I've underestimated his grasp of the world for a long time now, and maybe he understands that Xi is calling the shots in Ukraine. The North Koreans would not be in Russia unless Xi gave his consent. That's my opinion. Yes. Do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. No, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, one of the comments that he made when I interviewed him a couple of weeks ago was he said, many, many people are studying the war. And he said, including the North Koreans, and they even participated and sent their people in, and they learned the lesson hard. He said more things off the record, but that was one that he said.
So when you talk to the president, do you sense he really is thinking about grand strategy over decades? Because we need a president right now to do that, because we didn't have that.
I don't know that to be the case, Hugh. I'm not sure that is the case. I think he's more instinctive, and he moves in these ways, in approaching the issues at the moment. But I do think he has the perspective of, his own opinion, I think, is China's not going to move while I'm here, in the same way he thought that Russia would not move while he was there. But in the aftermath of a presidency, they may be forced to move, and if they are forced to move, then we have, a need to, protect our interests in that region and the interests of our friends and allies. And look, I think that some of the steps that he's taken are mindful of that in a way that, perhaps not informed by grand strategy, but, the instinct can also line up with that.
What did you take away vis-a-vis Iran? Because Secretary Rubio, his comments to me made me believe Donald Trump's about out of time with Iran, and that he could very well punch that ticket this weekend if they shoot at the Truman again, and he may call up Netanyahu and the UAE and the kingdom and say, let's go. Did you get a sense he's about had it with Iran?
I think that he is absolutely fed up with it, and I think that the elevation of this, as they've done, is a sign of that. I think he views something like that as an insult to America's existence and to all of our interests in the region. And I think you're particularly right about this. He may be at the breaking point on something like that, which would have some pretty profound effects if there is the kind of follow-up that I know Netanyahu would like to pursue.
Well, let's close with Netanyahu. As we speak, Israel's being convulsed. Now it's Shabbat, so they're not being convulsed tonight, but they were last night, and they will be again tomorrow after the Sabbath. And they've got an actual constitutional crisis there because the Supreme Court, without, again, I'm not an Israeli lawyer and I'm not a Jew, so I don't know, but it seems to me it's quite extraordinary for the Supreme Court to tell the prime minister of a country not to fire the head of your security services, and for the attorney general to act like a free agent. She strikes me as a complete ego-driven, just completely ego-driven diva.
On the surface, it certainly appears that way.
Yeah, so what do you think is going to happen there? Because they're teetering on the edge of genuine crisis.
Yeah, I wish I could have the answer for you on this. I don't have a crystal ball, of course, but I will say that, Netanyahu has guided Israel through the crisis of the past several months, always surrounded by this kind of pushback and blowback, and now it seems to be reaching a fever pitch. But I do think that it's very, he has always relied on the importance of the relationship with America to inform his actions, and I don't think he's going to be doing something right now that it does not have the backing of this administration. He views that as of supreme importance.
All right, last question, Ben. You talk to people on both sides of the aisle throughout the Beltway. You're very well connected among especially people of your generation. Are the Democrats increasingly embarrassed by what we're finding out happened or didn't happen in the Biden years by the Regency? I would be embarrassed to have anything to do with the Biden administration.
It is. I will just give you this anecdote. I know multiple people who served within that administration who, had jobs that were at a distance from the White House, meaning they were not inside the building. They were in other buildings, and they are aghast and embarrassed. And they have expressed that to me personally in ways that say, basically, I'm not sure about what this does to my resume. I'm not sure about what this does to my long-term career, because people are going to assume, rightly or wrongly, that I knew what was going on when, in reality, it was the sort of situation where, a lot of them, they were working for cabinet secretaries and the like who weren't even getting meetings with him. So they couldn't even know what was going on. And so it's the kind of thing where I think that this is going to have a ripple effect for a generation of Democrats who thought that they were serving the country. And as it turned out, we're serving the interests of Biden staffers who were not serving the best interests of the country or even of him.
I had Lord Andrew Roberts on yesterday, and we talked about the fact FDR at Yalta was incompetent. Biden in the last 2 years was incompetent. Woodrow Wilson was in a coma for 6 months. We really don't have a system built for this, do we?
No, we don't. And it's going to continue to be a problem as long as we have politicians, particularly a problem, is not to be ageist, but as long as we have politicians who are as old as some of the people that we still have within the system.
Oh, we can be ageist. You're talking to an old guy. I think we ought to put a cap on the top of everything, because the framers did not intend 80-year-olds to be running the government. Ben Domenech, always a pleasure. Have a great weekend. Follow him on X at @BDomenech. Go listen to the Ben Domenech Show. Hopefully you're going to get a podcast that goes longer, further, deeper, funnier, more sports, more entertaining friends, because I'd listen to that.
Sounds like a plan to me.
I'd listen to it, Ben. I'd listen to it. Joined by Lan Hee Chan of the Hoover Institution, Stanford Law School, and a good friend of the program. Lan Hee, how are you?
Great to be with you, Hugh. I'm doing well, thank you.
I want to begin by telling you that it just broke the story that Secretary of Defense Hegseth has ordered the Vinson, that's one of our carriers, and the rest of its strike group to join the Truman in the Middle East and has extended the deployment of the Truman. What do you think that means, Lanhee?
Well, look, I think first and foremost, it means that there's a belief in peace through strength. This is the philosophy that we have known. President Trump has talked about, that this administration has expressed, and it's showing that the United States wants to ensure that the rest of the world knows that we mean business. And I think that hasn't always been the case over the last couple of years. I think you've seen a number of things that would cause both our allies as well as our foes to call into question America's commitment to engaging around the world, as well as our commitment to ensuring that we have a seat at the table, but more than that, that we're leading. And I think that this is a tangible message of what it is we're trying to do, not just in the region, frankly, Hugh, but around the world. I
think personally, Trump is going to blow up the Iranian nuclear sites. Now that's quite a jump, right, from two carrier groups. But I don't think he's for fooling around, Lanhee. What do you think? He said to the Iranians, we can do this the hard way or the easy way, and they've told him we're not going to do it the easy way.
Well, the only way they really, in my mind, get the message is, again, it's about projecting American strength. And at the end of the day, our goal is not, kinetic conflict for the sake of kinetic conflict. It's to try and express a point of view about where America stands. And if you have any doubt about America's resolve on the issues that we care about, on the issues that matter to us and to the world, let there be no mistake. There's a reason why we're doing this. And I think sending a second carrier group into the region only reinforces that point of view.
All right, now let me ask you about the left, Lanhee. They have now found themselves, they got smashed up in the November election, and they are tied up with gender radicalism, domestic terrorism, both the Tesla terrorists, the Hamas supporters, the anti-Jew, anti-Semitic extremism, and climate justice, climate extremism. Can they get out of the corner they built for themselves? And it really started out where you live, Northern California, and it spread down to Southern California. But the blue land has become crazy land.
Well, they're in a real cul-de-sac, and I think they don't have leadership. And this is part of the challenge, is in the absence of leadership, you're going to have a vacuum. And unfortunately for them, maybe fortunately for those who would oppose the progressive movement, they don't have leadership that's just saying, hey, guys, we need to stop and figure out what it is exactly that we're doing and that we're advocating for. Let's not forget the November election was more than just about the election of specific people, although obviously that is important and impactful. It was about the American people saying enough is enough. Enough is enough on how far to the progressive left we've tilted on some of these issues. And I do think that message of accountability still has not been received by a lot of Democrats, and I think a lot of progressives by extension. And so the challenge they're going to have, Hugh, is they're not going to be able to seek out more reasonable ground, indeed probably majority ground of where Americans are, until and unless they realize they have a real gap in leadership. And until someone steps up and really leads from the perspective of saying that they want to be a party that's relevant again.
Well, let me ask you about that. You know, Gavin, you know everyone in California. Are they? Do they think they have a PR problem, or do they know they have a policy problem?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that they see it. I would say the majority of them see it as, for now, a PR problem, when in fact it is a fundamental problem with the architecture and the thinking of the progressive movement. So if they see it as a PR problem, they're going to be stuck in the political wilderness for several more years. I don't know, Hugh, that Gavin Newsom sees it as merely a PR problem. I think he may be one of the few Democrats who's saying, hey, listen, there needs to be a shift on these issues. Now, he may not end up being the most effective messenger nationally, but I think at least he recognizes that they have a fundamental problem in terms of their substantive positioning on these issues, and not just how they talk about them.
I think you're right. I hope you're right. Next time we talk, Lanhee, we got to talk about the courts and there's a mutiny underway now. We have the resistance have gone into robes, and I'm not talking about Judge Boasberg. That's different. That's a unique, non-justiciable political question, case of first impression. I mean, just some crazy decisions coming down, left, right, center, all over the country. Next time, I'm going to tap into your law chop to do that. Good to see you, Lanhee Chen. Follow him on X at Lanhee Chen. Follow him in the next segment. Jim The indispensable Garrity joins me next, America. Don't go anywhere, except don't forget, food for the poor. It is Lent. I do ask you to be generous. I do ask you to go to HughHewitt.com. I do ask you, wherever possible, to find that banner, Feed Their Future, and dig deep. $100 feeds a child for an entire year in El Salvador. And they've been helping us out this week, and they've turned that country around, but they still need our help. And if you need a Lenten observance and it's late in Lent, go to HughHewitt.com, find the banner at the top. You can trust Food for the Poor. Coming up, the Hillsdale Dialogue, Dr. Larry Arnn and I are making our way through Winston Churchill's wonderful book, My Early Life. I want to tell everyone, thank you for all your well wishes. I'm about 90%, still a little tired after that 3-week battle with the bug Genghis Kate gave me. But I actually did go up the implacable hill today. I'm exhausted. I did not trundle. I just walked it, but I got up there and back down. Took me a little bit longer than normal, but I won't feel any minor aches and pains because I took my relief factor all through the 3 weeks that I was down and out with the bug. And relief factor is something you take every day and you never miss it. And the reason you do it is because you want to keep the levels in your body of bicarbonate, curcumin, resveratrol, omega up. Now, I'm not a big supplement guy. I don't take anything other than relief factor. It's the only supplement I've taken for 20 years. If you're new to the show, you'll hear me mention it every hour because Relief Factor sponsors the program, sponsors the studios on the West Coast, inside the Beltway, and up north. And I move around between the three of them so that I can stay in touch with people all over the country and not become captive of the Beltway. Relief Factor makes that possible. And I love Relief Factor because it works. Since I was 22, I've been putting the miles in. So I got a lot of miles on the wheels. I used to be fast, now I'm slow, but I'm still out there. And I'm very rarely ill. I think that's because I try and get my exercise in. I'm not very coordinated, don't do much, but Relief Factor works. I want to tell you, 1-800-4, and the word relief. That's what you call, or you go to their website and find the starter pack for $19.95. 3-week starter pack, less than $1 a day. Stop masking the pain with Advil or Tylenol or whatever, and get rid of it with ReliefFactor.com. And I have a story to tell you that's not sponsored. It just makes me happy. I do have a new sponsor. I told you about it last week, Chapter. Chapter is a Medicare advisory firm. Chapter is big data. And you can find Chapter by hitting pound 250. An operator will come on and you'll say, Chapter Medicare, please. And 11,000 Americans every day turn 65, and you're obliged to enroll in Medicare when you're 65, whether you want to or not. All right, you've got to join. And it pays for your hospitalization. Medicare Part B pays for 80% of your medical bills. And then you have a few choices to make about a supplemental plan or a Medicare Advantage plan, and Medicare Part D, a drug prescription plan. There are 24,000 plans, all right? 24,000 plans in addition to Medicare A and B. And what you pay, by the way, it's means tested, so it's not an entitlement. It is an entitlement, but it's a means tested entitlement. And it's a complicated deal. And the books that the government has are like the books that Doge are throwing out at the window of every federal agency. They make no sense. And the notices you get from, I'm a boomer, so I get Medicare notices. And these Medicare notices are, this is not a bill, and they can't be read. They're designed by morons to be read by morons so that morons can't decide what's going on. And you have no idea. But the key thing is, are you getting good medical coverage for the years in which you're increasingly going to need medical coverage? And they just throw this booklet at you. And someone will say, well, try calling up Joe Bag of Donuts. They did a good job for me. And Joe Bag of Donuts will have some software program, and they'll ask you a few questions, and they'll make a recommendation, but you don't know if they're working for the insurance company or not. And look, I got nothing against. I've had the same insurance company, whether it's provided by my university, by my law firm, or by Medicare, for 45 years. I'm a blues guy. I like the blues. I think the blues are everywhere, and I move around a lot, so I like the blues. And there are different blues to pick from. But the number of drug companies, drug plans under Medicare Part D, it's just like a tidal wave of data. How do you figure it out? Well, you shouldn't have to. That's why artificial intelligence exists. And now it's gotten to the point that a group of tech bros got together. One of them is named Ari, went to Stanford Law, and they said, we can, and their parents were like my age, they're boomers. And they saw their parents struggling. I didn't struggle. I just think it's ridiculous because if you're a lawyer and you can teach con law and practice law and you can figure this out, great. But if you can't, I pity the fool, as they used to say. Pity the fool has to do Medicare. Well, the folks at Chapter crunched all the data, put it into a big machine, and now they've trained, 75 to 100 different people on how to ask you some very basic questions. They input the questions into the big data machine, and out spits the answer for you. And all you have to do is hit pound 250 and say Chapter Medicare, and you'll be connected with them. Now, they're not paying me to tell you this. My buddy Carl called last night. Carl was Dwayne's best man in his wedding. And we like Carl, right?
Immensely.
Immensely. We want Carl to have good medical care, right?
At least for the next couple of weeks.
Well, why? What happens after that?
You never know.
Oh, baseball season. That's right. He is a Pirates fan.
Exactly.
So he's going to be sad. And I wonder if they have, mental health treatment in some of these plans. If you're a Pirates fan, you really need mental health treatment. Sorry, Pittsburgh.
Seriously.
Sorry, WPIT. I love you. You know I love you. I really do. Kenny Pickett's our quarterback in Cleveland. Anyway, Carl sent me a note. Mrs. Carl got on the phone with Chapter, and they made a switch, and they saved money in one day. And better care, better coverage. And that makes me so happy that we have a sponsor that one of our good friends, okay, I'll give that a whirl, because everybody in Medicare hates it. Really, everybody does. Everybody hates it because it's just so stupid. It is so unbelievably complex that everybody who has to use it just hates it. And Carl's on top of his game. I wouldn't say he's on top of his third base game anymore. He can't move to his left anymore.
No, he pulled a hammy at short.
Yeah, it's very bad. But he's on his game. I mean, the guy's got all his marbles. He's a smart guy, and he's a wonderful man. So, and his wife's actually a saint. So she gets on there, and she gets Chapter, and and it's a blind test, right? They don't know that they're my friend. They have no idea that they're going to call me up and say, this thing was amazing, saved us some money, changed plans, worked. There are events that occur in the course of the year. If you change jobs, if you move from one state to another, there are events that allow you to change your coverage. Just remember Chapter, pound 250, an operator will answer, and you say Chapter Medicare. Pound 250, and you say Chapter Medicare. Tell them Carl sent you. No, actually, Hugh sent you. It's time for the poet laureate of the Hugh Hewitt Show, Tarzana Joe. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Hugh. You know, the problem that I have with this administration is that something can happen at the start of the week to inspire a poem, and then by Friday, 7 more things have happened that are poem-worthy. Well, this week, at the beginning of the week, the mainstream media began to make some admissions on how they covered COVID. And I've stuck with this theme because we are in the season of Lent, and it's important to know how to make a good confession in 3 parts. You may not be a Catholic, but you know confession's role. I'm sure you must have heard that it does wonders for the soul. It seals an open wound just like a surgeon with a suture. It puts away the past so you can face a brighter future. But lest you think confessing is a game that can be played, it isn't quite enough to say, I guess mistakes were made. One should begin confessing, rather insincerely should one. So here are 3 components if you want to make a good one. Acknowledging your sin, that's the way you make a start. Saying what you did in each particular and part. The second step is sorrow. I think I've got that right. It doesn't mean a thing unless you really are contrite. And this is more important than all I've said before. Saying with conviction that you vow to sin no more. The New York Times has told us, and it truly hurt my head, they were guilty of misleading us because they were misled. That may fulfill part 1, but clearly not parts 3 and 2. It doesn't sound like penitence to me. Does it to you? That's a good confession in 3 parts, or that lady gave me the apple, by Tarzana Joe.
I think I prefer your alternative title, Joe. That lady gave me the apple. Well, I will have to look at Tarzana Joe to see which one you use. I want people to know we have new audiences in the Hudson Valley, that all of your poetry for many, many years now, thousands of poems, all available at tarzanajoe.com. For your poetry needs, Joe is a poet for hire. He's a hired gun, a hired rhymer. He will rhyme for hire. He's a Hessian. He's a merc. And his rates are reasonable. All you have to do is write to him at tarzanajoe@reagan.com, tarzanajoe@reagan.com. How's business, by the way, Joe?
This was my most busy week ever. I don't know what inspired. There are lots of April weddings. Everybody's like marrying Sam showed up at my doorstep this week.
How long does it take to do a wedding poem usually?
As long as they let me.
All right. You know, Joe, I want to remind you.
April 1st, I got to go to work.
Milton Friedman, if the demand is too high, you're not charging enough, but you are reasonable. tarzanajoe@reagan.com. tarzanajoe@reagan.com for your poetry needs, or visit tarzanajoe.com for all your poetry needs.